sitting inside a large tower-like library tree, Ada, Kiadab, and Eleanor. Both Ada and Kiadab are reading a book, the former reading Athanasius for a school assignment and the latter reading Dante's Inferno for fun, while Eleanor chronicles a story. All is quiet until...
Interesting fact, Era. I finished reading Dante's trilogy on the afterlife, and now conclude the man did not know of what he spoke. Not only is his fictional approach to hell, purgatory, and heaven theologically inaccurate, he missed a few sins in his circles of hell.
I'm glad you caught up to the rest of the world, Kiadab, but what are you talking about?
I mean that in my attempts to classify all your sins in the circles of hell after reading through his books, I found that he missed clarifying a few sins.
I believe I see your point, but pray tell, what sort of sins has your Nittles himself come up with?
If you two are arguing again, could you take it up somewhere else?
Excuse us, Eleanor, but I was just telling Era my thoughts on Dante's plays, specifically his Inferno, considering Era was the one who recommended the books to me.
Yes, and Kiadab apparently says this fictional approach to understanding hell's nature is inaccurate and misses points. These points would be...
For instance, Dante forgets sins such as disrespect for parents, selfishness, and self-hatred, and gossip. Era also brought up another interesting one in her attempts to be insulting, being nettlesome, which is another way of saying driving someone to sin.
I surprisingly see what you mean, Kiadab, specifically in the last one. Why is there no classification for those who tempt others to sin? One would think temptation, which is what the devil does, would merit a strong punishment.
Perhaps those who tempt others would go into the circle for the frauds, more specifically Bulge 9, which holds the people who were sowers of scandal and sowers of schism abroad while they yet lived.
But Kiadab is not divisive. He merely rattles the tempers of other people and causes them to commit the most grave of sins. We should merely finish by saying Dante failed in portraying an accurate picture of hell.
Try to be kind, Ara, but I see you're in Kiadab's point. It seems as if our esteemed author did miss a few sins.
Despite that, however, I believe Dante was attempting to give a general overview of what he believed hell was like. I am sure he did not believe in his geography of hell, but rather was classifying his version based off Revelation 20:12, which asserts how the dead are judged according to what they have done.
My point about his failure still stands then, as he did a terrible job in judging the dead. Only God should be able to classify sins and judge according to anyone's deeds. Monosos theos dinete ne yapinin, after all. What right does a man have to assign an amount of evil to each sin, some of which he missed, and make a book out of it?
I know you are smarter than this, Ara, and while your uncharitable statement does make a little sense, it is unfair to judge his works based solely on askew theology. Rather, Dante's purpose was not to categorize how evil each sin was, but to use Revelation 20:12 as a loose guide to build the setting to explore his ideas. As we see, Dante has many beautiful truths in his works. In Inferno, he makes intriguing parallels between the nature of sins and their due punishments. For example, we see the juxtaposition in the fifth circle, where those who wallow hog-like in the mud were the sinners who wallowed in their unbridled rage. Even if you say and believe hell does not look like Dante portrayed it, you cannot deny the eternality of his themes, his honest and even right attempts to find more of who God was, or even the beauty of his terza rima scheme.
Eleanor does have a point. The beautiful truths and symbolism of the journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, though portrayed theologically inaccurate to our Protestant perspective, or it gives Dante's works merits and timelessness. Basically, yes. Dante has problems with the classifications of sin, as well as theology. But his trilogy of plays should not be discounted as worthless because purposeful themes, truths, and revelations given outweigh the problems contained.
But how do we know that his truths truly outweigh the problem for certain? What does qualify work, fictional work that is, as timeless and worthy of merit anyway, despite the contents it holds? If Dante's truth and symbolism allow his plays to receive honor, then is every great masterpiece revered because of their truth? Also, what does all this qualification for fiction mean for us? In other words, why has fiction survived, and what is its purpose?
One question at a time, Ara. If we want to find how a fictional story can be called worthy, then let us start with your first question. Why do you think Eleanor? What do you think, Eleanor? What qualifies a great book as great and worthy of being ingrained in our history and presence?
Just as we see in Dante's tomes, the story should have timeless truths, language, and/or probing ideals that outweigh any problems it might have. A low-born piece of art would not survive time and history.
To be fair, Eleanor, tales like Geoffrey Chaucer's Miller's Tale and the Reeves Tale have survived the ages and are even taught in high schools and colleges.
I would argue those two stories have survived solely because they were thrown amidst a collection of better, higher-minded works.
I would not say that exactly, Eleanor. For starters, the Miller's Tale does have merits of its own. Perhaps not in the content, but from the ideas we can derive from the content. Crass and crude as it is, would you not say the tale shows humanity's never-changing state of baseness and unquenchable desire for truth? The whole of Canterbury's tales, Miller's Tale and Reeves' Tale included, shows the different ways people search for truth and love.
In addition to what Ara says, this focus on all the different kinds of love and some different types of corrupted love or sensual desires not only shows humanity's eternal enjoyment of gross humor, but also their eternal craving for personal connection through love. This focus on all the types of love, or lusts, is an illusion of humanity's desire for love. We find that from the boorish Miller's Tale to the poetic Knight's Tale, Chaucer is attempting to find some definition of humanity as his characters explore the different kinds of love.
Coming back to our question of what qualifies a work as beautiful, Aura, would you then not agree that Dante, despite all his debatable content, still deserves his place of honor amongst the great literary authors? If you and Q agree that stories such as The Miller's Tale can hold places in the great books because of the look into humanity they give, then I am sure you agree that Dante is allowed his merit because of the look into humanity his plays give.
Just to be clear, we are saying that a book's themes and look into humanity is what allows it to receive merit, correct?
Certainly, and that the problematic content in Chaucer and Dante can be overlooked because of the exploration and illustrations of themes each has. In fact, would you not say most of our great literary authors are called great because of their ability to define some truth and find some sort of meaning through a book? Take a look at Homer with his theme on the complexities of humans and fate, Virgil with the clash between destiny and desire, Dante with his faith-related issues, and Sophocles and his obsession with sight and truth. They are all searching for something deeper than the outer world, and that is why every revered author of literature is revered.
Interesting. Every author is searching for truth, but why are they searching for truth?
Do you mean to ask what the reason under the search for truth is? As in, what is the purpose that connects of each author of fiction?
Yes, for if we have established that the search for truth outweighs context and theological issues, then I would like to know the singular answer for why these people search for truth.
I am not quite certain we can find a connecting purpose between every author's individual stories, considering that each tale is unique to each writer's view on life and philosophy as much as their plot lines are different. For example, if we take the three great epics of the classical times, the Iliad, Odyssey, and Aeneid, we can see the difference between each work concerning humanity and theme. In the Odyssey, we see the theme in the first line of a man, the wanderer, and his story of how he harried for years on end to find his way back home. Similarly, the Iliad focuses on war and anger, while the Aeneid tells its tale on journey and destiny.
That is true, Eleanor. While each book does focus on the different aspects of a human journey, they all have a theme of unity between the high and universal, and the individual with all its stories on gods, fate, destiny, and human choice. Just look at the Iliad with its focus on duty and destiny. So not even Zeus, a god, could fight them to save his son Sarpedon. And the Odyssey with its conflict between a man and a god and a higher destiny. Homer's epics bring in the individual into the grand scheme of the universe. In contrast, Virgil brings the universal into one man. Aeneas, an unfolded
Dum bum bum bum. All right, Aina, are you hearing us? Are we lost? Hello, Aina. Okay, looks
Mm.
like there we go. Aina, we lost you. Oh, maybe the repair guy didn't get everything fixed. Alright, Zoom's trying to reconnect. And just to make matters more fun, my mouse doesn't work anymore.
Okay.
Hmm.
I think Mr. H is back.
I'm hoping. Are you guys hearing me now? Oh, host has muted all participants. Okay. Who is host? Let's see. Not quite sure who host is now. Right. Now, also, why did my mouse disappear? Come on, mouse, get back here.
And Mr. H, you're muted, so we can't hear you right now.
Okay, I've got to go and get a mouse so I can control my computer. So. Oh, that's right. It's that little button that touches.
Could you hear Mr. H?
I need somebody to unmute me.
You can put it in the chat, maybe.
Well, I can't control my mouse, so dun 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 dun. So much fun. Oh, there. Okay, so now at least we got that back. Okay, now let's try to get this show on the road. Yes, sign out. What's this all about? All right. All right, Aina, are you hearing me now?
Yes, I am. And can you hear me?
I can. Sorry, our internet connection went out at the same time that my mouse went out. So let's back up just a little bit if we could. And could we go back to E saying, but how does this connecting thread between the epics tie?
Wait 1 second. Sorry, can you repeat the phrase?
But how does the connecting thread between the epics tie?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So if we could start back there, that'd be great.
How far back is that? I'm having trouble finding that place.
That's around page 4 on Word document.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's where we ended anyway, so. Okay. But how does this connecting thread between the epics tie in with Chaucer's ongoing theme of love? Can we say the purpose behind Chaucer's themes is also a portrayal of the universal destiny and mortal desires?
In a way, yes. For in each storyline, there was a struggle for a man against an idea, a goal nobler than the protagonists themselves. Whatever the object they may fight against may be, in the epics, there was a struggle between fate and man. Meanwhile, in Canterbury Tales, there is a struggle against the many forms of love in man. And if we come back to Dante's Inferno, we have a war between Dante and his inner passions and the grace of God, as shown in his first canto, where he wakes to find himself in a dark wood where the right road was wholly lost and gone.
That is more establishing the individual conflicts of each book. What is the tying thread between those conflicts of the high and the low?
Perhaps these individual searches for truths lead back to tell us that life is struggle, and man will always be faced with trials and troubles beyond his control. Love, destiny, duty, these are all beyond our control, and still we must face them one way or another. Would those themes not apply to most of the great fictions of time? Each author of fiction always searches for truth through a conflict. Thus, the connecting thread behind each author's search for truth is the attempt to show this conflict between man and himself, God, or some other being.
Is that not too general, merely saying the timeless fictional stories search for truth because each author was focused on portraying some form of conflict? Would the idea not apply to our current literary media, despite some of its conflicts being less eternal in its truths. I mean, the conflict should not be the underlying reason for why our literary minds wrote beloved and praised books. And anyway, remember that the philosophies, ideas, and shattering perspectives they present, or lead us to see in cases such as the Miller's Tale, are what give them their merit.
Thinking over Kyoda's rambling, I think what he was attempting to say with his comment on conflicts was not that the authors search for truths because they wish to explore conflict, but rather that they wish to explore truths because they are searching for an idea or some meaning that is greater than time itself. They search for truth in their individual ways because they are all searching for the greatest truth, whether they are aware of it or not.
I begrudgingly acknowledge your statement. Our aforementioned authors search for individual truths because, ironically, they wish to search for one eternal truth, which is God. So, to rephrase my earlier statement on conflict, the stories are not only connected by their ability to weave in truth, but also because of their different ways to search for the absolute truth.
So, if the connecting purpose behind each author's different ways of searching their own truths is that they are seeking God, why would they do so through fiction?
Easy. Fiction can open our eyes to those deeper truths. Speaking of eyes, take Oedipus Rex. Consider Tiresias' words. You with your precious eyes, you're blind to the corruption of your life. Contrasted with Oedipus's, all come true, all burst to light, now let me look my last on you. Look at the way these themes present themselves. Through this play alone, we can see the complications of knowledge and truth in a personal, relatable way. The story shows so clearly the complexities of humanity when suppressing or over receiving truth, beginning with a prophecy, and ending with Oedipus's knowledge of his deeds.
While I hope you're not saying you relate with Oedipus' story, Ira, in essence, I would say you have identified the point. It is difficult to picture the horrors blindness or too much light in the metaphorical sense can offer us. Oedipus Rex depicts the themes in such a way that not only would you be hard pressed to forget the man who accidentally married his mother and killed his father, you would have those themes on sight ingrained in your mind.
But as Ara has so often complained before when reading difficult literature, would the meanings not be easier to understand through prose? Just as you did right now with both of your summaries. Would the theme of truth not be easier just to summarize rather than fictionalize?
First of all, Eleanor, I complain about literature such as Kant or Aristotle, dry, difficult to understand, and extremely unpalatable to my action-seeking mind. While there are arid souls out there able to breathe in the moisture of those books, a story with a plot makes a theme so much easier to understand and internalize those themes and ideas. Let us take Plato and Chaucer for examples. Both write in different genres, but they both have an intertwining theme of love. In Plato's Phaedrus, we have Socrates discussing his ideal of love as a divine madness overtaking people. With Chaucer, you have different ideas of love outlined through the different stories on love. And if presented with a choice between Plato and Chaucer, most would rather take Chaucer's tales, solely because Chaucer creates characters and stories that relate to the audience, rather than preaching a long monologue of theme and high-minded complexities. And being more palatable to read, it leaves more of an impression.
I concede to your points, unless the teacher is particularly good at explaining and digging deep in both, Ira. Perhaps comparing Plato and Chaucer is not fair, though, considering Plato's play-like format to deal with his philosophies is also a form of fiction.
Then you do see how writing even dry philosophical dialogue in a fictional style, Plato's underlying plot consisting of Socrates convincing someone ignorant of what is true, can be more helpful in showing readers complex ideas and perspectives.
So, what I am hearing you say, Ara, is that not only does fiction make difficult subjects easier to understand, they are also superior in actually helping us understand themes than non-fictional prose?
Not always, no. Since the prosaic nonfiction of all our darling philosophers, scientists, and literary heroes have helped society and culture as well. I'm merely saying for the average human being, reading those sorts of books is just plain hard. And revolving a fictional story with intriguing or lovable characters allows one to drink in the book's themes in a personalized, relatable, and comprehensive way.
Agreed. While Plato and Aristotle are beautiful works of philosophy, the epics Chaucer, and even Dante's tales, do have this way of revealing complexities and simplicities, as fiction should do. After all, one must commend Dante for applying geometry in his Paradise in a grandiose way Euclid's Elements could never do.
Considering the points between Euclid and Dante and Plato and Chaucer, I will agree with the fact that fiction is sometimes easier to swallow. To be fair, even Ara's arid Aristotle admits poetry is something more philosophic and of graver importance than history, since its statements are of the nature of universals rather than singulars. However, even so, I still wonder if looking for a summary and explanation of a book would not be easier than reading it itself, thereby gathering the philosophies presented from outside sources and not distracting yourself with the storyline.
Eleanor, why in the heavens would you sputter out such nonsensical obscenities when you yourself are a storykeeper? I know you mainly chronicle histories, but the style in which you do them follow the fictional approach because you admitted they were more palatable to the casual readers.
I know, Ara, but I do bring a valid point. Besides, you have not answered my questions on summaries and literary works.
This reminds me of C.S. Lewis's introduction in On the Incarnation, where he exhorts the modern readers to sit down with the great authors rather than read commentary, explanations, and summaries of them. The simplest student would be able to understand a very great deal of what Plato said, but hardly anyone can understand some modern books on Platonism. Lewis brings up a valid point concerning fiction. Though he, though he applies to Plato, while reading summaries of books may be helpful, doing so opposes our earlier statement that fiction is a comparably easier approach to help to the great search for truth than most nonfiction works are. Summaries and secondhand sources are wonderful, but in the end, they are works of nonfiction that diminish the purpose of fiction work can do.
Just to be clear, we agree the purpose of almost all fiction is attempting to look for truth, and that it does so in a more agreeable way than non-fictional truth-seeking does.
Yes, thus, fiction is easier to read than nonfiction, and reading summaries of literature is counterproductive to its original purpose to inform and spin the webs of ideas and philosophies into thrilling stories, epics, and plays.
Exactly. As we see in Dante and our other authors, they may not correctly explain or present the truths of theology or some idea. However, the nature of their purpose for writing their works redeem them with the timeless ideas they present. They follow their individual trails of truth, and in doing so end up presenting deep realities on humanity, society, nature, and so on.
In addition to that, everyone, these authors included, is searching for God and has a black hole in his soul waiting to suck in the never-ending light of God. The various ways people search for truth is, in reality, a quest for God. He is the truth, after all. Like Dante said, they will fall short of finding the truth. They may not be able, they may not be even be seeking the correct truth. Nevertheless, you can see a reflection of God's unshakable will through Homer and Virgil's theme of unbeatable destiny. Or you can see a similarity between Sophocles' reflection on the pain of blindness in truth to the Bible's assertion of truth being able to tear or set free. With all of these, we can see everyone is searching for God.
I agree, Ara. Fiction or nonfiction may attempt to assert its own truths and meanings, and does, as we have said. But in the end, you can see hints of a longing for a great creator.
Would you both stand by your assertions when faced with stories such as The Miller's Tale?
Well, yes, for even the basest, most meaningless stories show humanity's need and want for God. Taking the example of the Miller's Tale, it is certainly a story which has no real meaning nor eternal truth, save for the fact humanity will always be depraved. Whether the author intended it or not, the story is another way to show humanity's utter.
Foolishness without God and their desperate, very real need for a savior. Or perhaps the story even shows those pigs in the Bible tells us not to throw our pearls to, knowing they will only misuse the jewels and trample them like something worthless.
Yes, Zara, though you did not need to say so in such a way. We can conclude from this conversation that Dante, like most authors of fiction, intended for his play to display the truths he sought, as outlined in Canto 1.
Finally, fiction is a wonderful tool to display journeys of truth in such a way that nonfiction cannot.
And ultimately, just as Dante's journey through the afterlife led to God, whether the truth comes from the basest short stories or the deepest, most emotive epics, our journeys through literature will eventually guide us to a vision of heavenly truth.
Thank you very much, Miss Stowe. Very well done. It's a pleasure to listen to you. You've brought out an interesting contrast between the use of story and prose in order to portray truth. And I would like you to try to explain in a little bit more detail why it is that some truths are better conveyed in different mediums. Just a common example, Euclid's Elements. If you wanted to explain Proposition 147, you said, well, let me tell you a story. I don't think that would be very helpful. And in the Bible, we have different forms. We have history. We have, like First and Second Kings. You have didactic prose like Romans or Galatians. And you also have stories like the Gospel. And so you have the different modes employed throughout the Scriptures. And I'm not sure if all of those different modes can convey the same truths. And so could you say more about what modes, whether it be storytelling or prose, are better suited to which truths?
Well, I mean, there are some truths that are better suited in like a more mathematical approach. Like you said, Euclid's Elements can be shown very well through the prose that Euclid wrote in his own book. However, Dante also used geometry to explain God in a way. And I think through explaining God through geometry, he also could explain geometry in a way that could relate to Christians who maybe were having trouble with it.
All right.
And in, sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead. I was interrupting you.
And in the same way, I think that stories could also impact someone by showing some sort of truth or moral, like Jesus did with his parable, through both using ethos and his own pathos to show some sort of truth.
All right. At the end of Dante's Divine Comedy, as he comes up towards the vision of God, his ability to describe gets less and less. The glory of God becomes greater and greater, and finally at the end he just says, love spins in delight, and you really can't say anything. Do stories rather than prose come closer to being able to describe those things that really are beyond comprehension?
I think so in a way. While Euclid's Elements are very helpful in explaining absolutes, I think that sometimes the imagination must be applied so that you could understand how these truths must be applied to your everyday life, or how these great eternal truths can be, I guess, sort of tied into your own existence. It's sort of like how God told the parable of the lost coin and the lost sheep, how God was more excited to find that one sheep than relief for the 99 others. It's in prose you can see that, oh yes, God is very happy to have me, but in a story that relates to humanity and its emotions, it could have more of an impact and more of a vision that you can see.
All right. How about, we'll just take a theme, for example, like God's grace. All right. You want to talk about the theme of God's grace. You know that ultimately it's beyond human comprehension. And yet, what's going to get you closer? Reading Galatians or reading a parable or a story? Or in what way can each of them get you closer in different ways?
I think Galatians can give you more knowledge as well as better understanding, since Paul wrote his book very well. But a story can also give clarity as in how to apply it to real life. Like if you told it through a parable that about a father forgiving his own son, such as in the prodigal son, you will have a emotional as well as mental impact and see just how powerful the grace of God is compared in earthly terms.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, I'll go ahead and open it up to others, locals or onliners who would like to ask questions. And Miss Hashi is ready to start us off. Go ahead, Miss Hashi.
Okay, well, first off, great job. That was a very Aina paper, and anyone who knows you knows that's a very high compliment. Um, I wanted to ask, so it's a bit of a smaller part in your paper, but you talk about Chaucer and maybe why some of his darker stories are sticking through time, and you talk about how what it reveals about human nature, and maybe that's why it's important to study those things. But there seems to be sort of a divide where people want to, when it comes to children, either shelter them completely or expose them to a lot of things and then say, but don't do that. Which you feel like is an appropriate approach?
I think that children should be allowed to stay children for a certain period of time. The Bible does talk about putting childish things behind us in one moment of our life. And so for those darker stories, I don't think you should show them to a kid, of course not. But um, I think there's a line between sheltering and exposing them because there will come a time when the child will understand enough to know that this is bad and know why this is bad. And it really depends on everybody, but having a good combination of keeping some things hidden and revealing them slowly, I think would be a better approach to these great works of dark literature.
Okay, and then my follow-up question that would be to for adults: should you be sort of trying to know your enemy by understanding maybe what might motivate people to sin and then learning about those things specifically, or is it better to try and protect your heart a bit more, even as an adult, not necessarily as a child?
Actually, I kind of think that you can protect your heart while knowing all of these dangerous things. I think it's in the Bible in Matthew, but it also says that you can be as innocent as a dove and as wise as a snake. And because of that, it's good to know the sin that permeates this world, but also know how to counter it and how to rely on God. If that makes
Okay,
sense.
thank you.
All right, other questions? All right, you cannot see here, so I will call on her. Anna, would you go ahead?
Okay, so first, Ina, I loved your paper because books and all that.
Oh, sorry, I can't really hear you.
Okay.
You might even need to come and walk
yeah.
over closer, so or you don't want to. You're kind of far away, so.
Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So first off, lovely paper. I really liked it. I had some questions, generally speaking, over the theme of your paper on, timeless truths and whatnot. So since, when we follow Aristotle, all men by nature desire to know. So since everyone is searching in their own way for some sort of truth, and that expresses itself in story, couldn't every story then be an exploration of truth and thus worth reading?
Well, in a way, yes. I think I said it somewhere in my paper, but even the rudest and most crassest stories could be used to pinpoint the truth. Let's say, like the Miller's Tale, it shows how humanity is depraved and how his sense of humor hasn't really changed throughout the years. And if we want to do more modern stories, maybe like Twilight, it could probably show such things like toxic behavior or how every human craves love and how every human also craves the supernatural and fantastical since they're just kind of since society is petering away from God.
So would that mean that any story out there could possibly be worth reading? Are there stories that we should prefer over others, even if all of them hold some nugget of truth?
I think that there's a reason why great books are called great books, and I think it's because their truths are so well portrayed and more obvious to the common reader. But I wouldn't say that it's good for everybody to read like Twilight or some more R-rated material because they might not be able to glean those truths from the book or see any merit in them. It really does depend on the reader.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions?
Ellery?
Yeah, so I really liked your paper. Good job. Um, I guess I was wondering if you could clarify for me your stance on nonfiction, because a lot of this paper is focusing on how fiction is good and how fiction is worthwhile to read. I guess just can you clarify for me what you think the place for nonfiction is and how nonfiction also is good for us?
Well, nonfiction is a way to more systematically and I guess a bit more mathematically show people the truths and ideals and morals that we want to show. Story is a way to emotionally connect the reader to them, but nonfiction is a way to inform the people that this exists and this is why it's like this. It also just has been just so ingrained in society, like say newspapers. They're nonfiction and they're a great way to portray the news better than a story would. So I guess the difference between fiction and nonfiction would be that fiction helps you connect with the ideas, while nonfiction helps explain them in a more deeper sort of way.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. And then I had one more question, kind of based on what Ella and Anna were asking. Um, you're saying that most stories, perhaps even all stories, are worthwhile to read, and you talk in your paper about how we can connect with those stories and how we can learn from them and really get a vision from them. How would you say that we connect with them and learn from them and in a way have an open mind to them while still protecting our beliefs and our hearts from ideas that might be untrue in them?
I guess it would be like debating with somebody. Like when you read a book, it's kind of like opening conversation with the author who wrote it. And you might not necessarily believe or agree with their stance on such things, but in a way you can just inform yourself on what the public thinks. And in story, you can also see what the general public also wants, as publishers these days are kind of veering towards the popular trend than truths. And so I think that when you read a story, it's yeah, like debating to inform yourself and to maybe just enjoy a story even.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to ask a further question. You talked a lot about pagan literature desiring truth and pagans being able to have an understanding of truth, and brought out kind of that longing for truth that even pagans seem to possess. I've oftentimes been curious how oftentimes Christians don't desire truth. They seem to be a little bit like Jocasta, where if the truth sounds bad, they're just not in, they just don't want to hear it, or if the truth is hard to understand, they're really not very diligent in pursuing it. And yet, when you developed the idea later in your paper, you said that the desire for truth is really like the desire for God. Now, how can so many Christians who desire God oftentimes really not be that interested in curiosity and the pursuit of truth?
I think in a way maybe a lot of Christians are very overconfident in their Christianity. They forget that they're supposed to search for God and keep on journeying in their faith. And because of that, and maybe sometimes they had bad experiences with truth where they applied it in a bad way, or maybe they just didn't care.
All right, that's not me talking, that's the crow. So if that's what you're hearing in the background there. But would you say that the desire for God and the desire for truth are really the same thing, or in fact sometimes different for people?
Well, Jesus did call himself the way, truth, and the life. And I think when most people talk about truth, they maybe talk about more earthly truths, such as are you lying, are you being honest, or is nature really happening? And I think people just stop there. They don't want to explore deeper into what this desire for honesty and truth, their own sort of truth is.
All right, thank you very much. All right, other questions?
Can you hear me all right from there? I guess
Sorry, did somebody talk?
Yeah. You know, you just play it right, but there's.
So I had a question, just in general. If stories can convey truth, can they also convey falsehood? And if so, would there also be a danger in stories, in these stories that portray falsehood as if it were truth?
Yeah, I definitely think that stories can portray falsehood, just like newspapers and general nonfiction philosophy books can. But I think you can also learn from them in a way. You can learn what takes in people and maybe how people are taken in by falsehoods through the writing or the story. And I don't know if it's wise to read them. It really depends on how discerning somebody is. But yeah, while I can portray falsehoods, it can also help you understand what another person thinks and how they achieve brainwashing others into their own beliefs.
I have another question from
Yeah,
Anna.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier, and I believe this was in response to Ellery's question, you mentioned something about the news. So I wanted to ask, so where do you highlight the difference between the meaning or what we can find in a true story versus a fictional story?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Okay, so you mentioned about the news in your response to Ellery's question earlier. So I was curious to know how you would highlight what meaning we can find in the difference between a true story, such as you might find in the news, versus a fictional story.
Oh, I think the meaning you can find in a true story as well. Obviously, the just information and the general goings on of the public. But in fake news, I think you can also see both the mind of an individual who's writing that fake news and also maybe what people want to hear. Because sometimes people would rather hear lies than the truth. And the response to that story could also be eye-opening to the character of humanity, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying since we see this through the mind of the author, we can also see that there's the falsehood in there. So would you say that that falsehood is almost essential to understanding truth itself, something that you can't necessarily find in a true story?
I need to do some more research on that, but I sometimes wonder if lies can also exist to be contrasted to the truth, such as you can have a truth, but you don't need lies. But sometimes those lies can help you see what is true because they themselves are not the truth, like a reductio ad absurdum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
All right, and I would like to look at another comment that you made in the paper. You mentioned that what gives a book its merit is its ability to look into human nature. And there does seem to be books that are not really written to give you a profound understanding of human nature. They oftentimes simply give us opportunity to distract ourselves. I mean, a lot of pleasure reading seems very formulaic, very repetitious plot lines, and would you say that what really gives literature its merit is somehow only just this capacity for burrowing into the deeper aspects of man's nature, or is there also greatness to be found in diversion and lightness?
I think I heard a quote once said that fiction isn't really taking away from reality, but it's a way to see reality at a different vantage point. So I think those pleasure readings that are about fantasy or very formulaic might maybe not be the most pleasant to read or most deepest to read, but they can also show characters or maybe human nature or truths about God, humanity, and such things in a way that might appeal to the normal reader. It can use human nature to make their formula.
All right. Thank you very much, Miss Dope. Any other questions? All right, Miss Doe, thank you very much. Really enjoyed your presentation. Glad to have you be able to express yourself to us this morning. And also, I know that you guys did move, and so please send me your new address so that I can get you your GBT5 box. Very well done, and it's been great having you in class. I'm sorry. This is our saying goodbye to you right now, and hopefully I'll be able to see you again in Spain sometime. So.
Wait, sorry, did you just ask for an address?
Yes, please make sure that you email me your new address so that I can mail your GBT5 box to you.
Okay.
All right, very good. Okay, and we have Mr. Castaneda here. Very good to see you, Karsten, and we'll get with you in just a little bit.
And so, thanks. And thanks, Ellery and Tate, for helping me